Hey everyone, welcome to Buckeye Bloomstead. My name's Debbie and I'm glad that you're all with us here today. This video today is on our do-it-yourself raised garden beds that we built ourselves and wanted to share with our viewers. You will be amazed of how beyond easy this project really is. After filming, we discovered an issue with the audio, so we have had to recreate the audio for the video. This has turned out to be a blessing in disguise. It has allowed us to add more information we meant to provide the first time and overlooked. I also realized too, that I no longer have the recording voice like I once did. Chronic lung issues have changed that. So, with the assistance of voiceover, we think it has created a much better audio experience for our viewers. We appreciate you understanding why voiceover has become necessary. Before we get started, would you please subscribe to our channel if you have not already done so? And if you like this video, please give it a like. Taking these 2 steps will help our channel grow so that we can reach more viewers. Now on with the video. DIY raised beds. We have several garden beds here on our very small homestead. When we decided to build raised beds, we did a lot of researching on the subject. Due to health issues, we knew if we wanted to continue to garden, that we needed to find an easier way. Our research led us to the raised beds concept. Once deciding on what type of beds would fit our needs, we ordered the lumber, soil and supplies and had them delivered. We ended up ordering more lumber than we needed for the raised beds because we also had another backyard project in mind: to build our freestanding patio deck. We had all of the supplies delivered, which in our case was the only way to go. After all, we didn't have a truck and there was no way a trailer towed behind our SUV would have ever supported the weight of all the supplies. Plus, the big box store we purchased everything at was willing to deliver it all free, and using a forklift they had on the truck, could set the supplies down exactly where we needed them. After doing our research and coming up with a plan, we decided on lumber that was 12 inches wide, by 2 inches thick by 8 feet long. We would cut our lumber for the sides at 4 feet, to maintain a bed that was 4 feet wide by 8 feet long. That would make a raised bed that would allow us to reach from each side to the center of the bed with no difficulty. We wanted to avoid having to step up into a bed to tend to the garden because we wouldn't have been able to reach everything had we made them any wider. So, we wanted raised beds that reached a minimum of 12 inches in height, to 24 inches tall. You can see the lower beds are 12 inches in height. In our case, one level is 12 inches in height, and some of our beds are 24 inches in height by stacking the 12-inch wide boards, one on top of the other to give us that 24-inch height we were looking for. Higher would have been better for me in hindsight due to my spinal issues, but 24 inches was the next best thing and has worked great for our needs. You are probably wondering why we decided to use raised beds instead of an in-ground garden. Well, we have had in-ground gardens most of our lives. But after my cancer, and the permanent side effects caused by chemo, along with my damaged spine, we had to rethink how we gardened. I am sure many of you can relate. We are in our 60s with bodies that seem to be falling apart, so this contributed to the decision we made to build raised beds. And I have to tell you that raised beds are so much easier to maintain. I wish we had built these years ago. It doesn't matter how old you are, regardless of your age, or physical limitations. If you want to garden the easy way, these raised beds are the way to go. Also, if you happen to have property where the soil is not that great, like clay soils, rocky or sandy property, raised beds are the solution. Not to mention, if you happen to rent and can't have a traditional in-ground garden, a raised bed makes them easy to build and take back down, should you ever move. When planning your raised garden beds, you will find all over the internet great ideas for raised beds. From DIY to prefabricated garden beds. All with a wide variety of price points to boot. There are many choices for gardening. However, many of you who are on a fixed income such as Social Security, may find most commercial raised bed products financially out of reach. Now of course, the cost of building your own raised beds depend on many factors. Like, how many beds you need or want, the material they are made out of, and the cost of soil to fill your beds with. And let's face it, times are tough for a lot of people nowadays, regardless of your age. So, budgets are tight for a lot of us. For us, it was going with the do-it-yourself raised bed concept. We needed to build our own. In building our raised garden beds, we decided to go with the treated lumber. I know there's probably a lot of viewers out there right now that are cringing over the word treated. But here is the thing. Times have changed. The new treated lumber, that was once treated with toxic chemicals in the past, is generally no longer the case today. The lumber that we bought has been treated with a copper-based product that makes them safe to use for raised beds, and not with the toxic chemicals that were once the norm. We were so happy to hear this, needless to say. We double-checked that information, so the lumber we bought indeed was safe to use for our raised beds. Normally, we would never have bought treated lumber if it was still processed using the toxic chemicals of the past. But it was safe for us to do so now. With this being said, we still took precautions, wore gloves when handling it and a mask when cutting it, just to play it doubly safe. You don't have to go with treated lumber if your budget does not support it. Do what you can afford. You can use untreated exterior lumber, which will still give you many years of use. The type of wood you use is also something to think about. Cedar is a good choice, as is redwood, because experts say it holds up pretty well long term, but it is very costly nowadays, at least in many parts of the United States, due to availability and demand. We wanted to make sure that in our case, these new raised beds would hopefully be the last time we would ever need to build them. Because we are getting a little bit older and can't do the things that we once used to do. We went ahead and spent the extra money to build some raised beds that hopefully will be the last ones we will ever have to build in our lifetime. Once in a while, there might be a board here and there that we have to replace, and that won't be a big deal to do, or have done for us. But for the most part, these beds should last us a long, long time. This also is part of the reason why we went with this design using the treated lumber. The blocks that you see here make it very easy to build a bed in practically any configuration that you want. And all you have to do, utilizing these slots right here, is slide your lumber right down in it. Our lumber is 2 inches thick, by 12 inches wide, and they are about 8 feet long. You can make them as long as you wish. But keep in mind, you are better off putting shorter beds together to keep the length to avoid longer side boards on the bed warping. We use our 24-inch high beds for plants that like having deep soil to grow in. 12-inch beds are great for strawberries, lettuce, and all sorts of veggies, and fruits that do not require deep soil to grow in. Just check your seed and plant instructions for the ideal planting environment. Anything, for example, that develops a taproot, will prefer a deep soil bed to properly grow in. Our 24-inch tall beds are ideal for this. Now, although we bought 12-inch wide boards, you could also just simply use 2x4 boards, which are more affordable, and stack them on their sides to make the beds whatever height you need. Simply stacking more blocks too allows you to stack more boards to accommodate the desired height. So, depending how high you want your raised beds to be, you will need to add more blocks to accommodate the boards you are stacking on their edges to fit down inside each block. I bought these metal plates as seen in the photo, which had holes for using screws, and mounted them on the inside of the bed using short deck screws, where each board connects to the other to help keep them from warping and twisting. You could install them on the inside or outside of the bed, whichever you prefer. If you install them on the outside, it will make it easier if you ever have to replace a board to remove the brackets so you can replace the lumber. If they are installed on the inside, you will need to remove the soil where the plates were installed to access the screws for removing. We put ours on the inside, for aesthetic reasons. When installing these brackets, in our case, we used 2 on each side. We placed each bracket about a foot or so from each end of the board for each side of the bed. If your boards are too long to begin with, warping could occur. There are different size plates you can purchase to use in this manner. We purchased some that were about 2 inches by 4 inches long. They have holes in them already, making them easy to attach with a 1-inch or a slightly longer deck screw depending on how thick your lumber is. You don't want to use a screw that will go through to the other side. If you want a long raised bed, beyond let's say 10 feet, you are better off making shorter beds, like 8 foot in length and butting beds together. Now keep in mind, you do not have to use the blocks at all, especially if it is not in your budget to do so. Simply cut your boards to the length you need using a hand saw, electric circular saw, or whatever you choose to use. Then nail or use deck screws to attach all 4 edges together. Make sure it is square using a square, creating a bed as wide and as long as your lumber allows. So, as you can see, the good thing about using these blocks is that you can make them in any configuration that you want, very quick and easy. Just make sure where they will be setting, that you have what comes in contact with the earth level. We did have our beds in a different design and ended up changing one of them because we had to have our plumbing worked on and one of the beds was in the way. Then later on, we moved the others to another part of the yard. That is what made this design so nice. We could take them apart and put them back together, and over time, any wood that goes bad at any point, it's really easy to replace them out. Now I won't lie, moving the soil from the bed after we took them apart was difficult for us due to our physical limitations. However, we managed. So, it turned out not to be that difficult. If you do not have physical limitations, you will not find this difficult at all should you need to ever move them. Just remember though, you don't have to use the blocks like we have done. You can simply just put the ends of the boards together like making a square or rectangle shaped bed and use deck screws to attach the boards together. We also could have used 2x4 boards instead, and you can certainly use 2x4 boards as well, stacking them to make your bed as high as you need. And keep in mind, you can really use any lumber that you want as long as it fits down in the slots of the blocks. You want them to be no thicker than 2 inches or they will not fit. To use these blocks and have them fit correctly, the boards need to be about 2 inches. Like the thickness of a 2x4, which isn't really 2 inches by 4 inches once they finish milling each board. But you get the idea. The blocks only work well using around a 2-inch thick board. Also, do not use plywood to build your beds with. They will not hold up and the chemicals and glues used to make the plywood will probably be toxic, and you don't want that in your garden whether or not you are growing food. In our case, we found that the 2-inch thick lumber, 12 inches wide fit our needs. It's the kind of lumber you would use when building a deck. Real wood, no laminated materials. After putting our beds together, we took an extra step and decided to reinforce these blocks with steel bars that have holes in them that allows us to screw them to the wood after we pound them in the ground, or you can place them down the cutout in the blocks instead, which is how we use them. Because we have our blocks stacked 4 high on our 24-inch high beds, we felt we needed to take this extra step. This helps keep them from shifting as you see in the photos. So, we thought. Over time, we did have some shifting of the blocks and decided to redo them. We took the problem areas apart and removed or added soil to help make them straight and level. We added to them a 2x4 board cut to fit the height of the stacked blocks plus about 4 inches. We cut one end of each board into a point, so it was like a large thick stake. We then hammered them down into the ground by placing them down the cutout on the blocks. They fit perfectly into the slot on these blocks. I wish I had thought about that when we first built them. It may have saved us work later having to re-straighten the columns of blocks and straightening the beds. We then reinforced the wood stakes with the steel bar you see in the photo. After hammering them into the ground along the wooden stake, we then thought using deck screws to attach the steel bars to the wood stakes would be a good idea, but we found that in our case it started to pull the stake away from the slot in the block, defeating the intention of keeping the blocks from shifting over time with the stake and steel rod. Maybe had we used a longer stake or rod this might have worked with the screws, I don't know. So we elected to not attach the metal bars to the wood stakes using the screws and just hammer them down into the ground along the face of the stake with a mallet. This seems to have worked fine so far. Now you don't have to reinforce any of it. You can just slide the boards down into the stacked blocks and be done with it, making this build beyond easy. But as we said earlier, we decided to take this extra step, initially with the steel bar, then redoing it with the 2x4 stake and the steel bar. We now think our beds are much sturdier than before, and hopefully will prevent any further shifting. I don't think they're going anywhere now. Now for the inside of our beds, what we did to prepare the bed is this. For soil, that is. We did not remove any grass before we build the beds. We just made sure when we built the beds, that the blocks and lumber was level as possible, removing any lumps of grass in the board and blocks path from sitting level. When we put the beds together to begin with, we dug out or added soil as needed for leveling. For the bed to be square as possible, be sure your side boards are exactly the same length, and that the sides are both cut the same lengths. In our case, our side boards were cut to be 4 feet long. If your boards are cut correctly, and laid level along with the blocks, your raised beds will look great. Since our lumber is treated, we wanted them to weather normally for that weathered look. Now, even with all of these steps taken, your raised beds will never be totally perfect. There will be minor imperfections that we feel add to the unique beauty these beds will offer. Over time, when your lumber has completely dried, you can stain or paint them if you wish, or as some do, torch them with a propane torch for that burned effect. We prefer ours to be totally natural. That is good enough for us. After attaching the metal flat brackets inside the beds to stop twisting, we then put a bunch of cardboard, free of any grease, spilled chemicals, paint, packing tape, or staples, and placed them down in the bottom of the bed, covering up any exposed ground, especially grass and weeds. Now, if your cardboard has any print on the cardboard like when it was manufactured, don't worry about that. It will not pose a threat to anything in the bed. Use it. It's a great way of using any old packing boxes or cardboard you may have stored. After laying the cardboard down, even in layers if you have that much cardboard to use, we then filled the beds with soil that was meant to be used in raised beds. To safeguard your raised beds against the industrious endeavors of gophers, moles, or other burrowing critters, consider employing hardware cloth, often referred to as chicken wire. Available in rolls, this mesh can be tailored to the dimensions of each bed using wire cutters. You have the flexibility to install it either before laying down the cardboard barrier or afterward, ensuring a fortification against unwanted underground guests. This preventative measure creates an impenetrable base that blocks burrowers, who find the chicken wire a formidable barrier to chew through. In our case, the concern for such burrowing visitors was minimal, thanks to our unique location atop an old rock quarry, significantly reducing the likelihood of such animal activity. However, if your garden's location leaves you uncertain about the presence of these critters, or if you'd rather err on the side of caution, laying down the chicken wire is a wise step. Installing this protective layer becomes a challenge once your beds are filled with soil, as discovering a burrowing problem post-filling would necessitate the laborious task of removing the soil to address the issue. Better safe than sorry, as they say, especially when it comes to preserving the integrity of your garden sanctuary. We did not have that issue, so we did not use the chicken wire. Not to mention that our property sits on an old rock quarry, so it's not likely we would have that issue at all. If you use the hardware cloth, be sure the hole size of the chicken wire is small enough to prevent gophers or moles or other burrowing animals from being able to burrow up through the diameter of the holes. Worms can still come up through it, but it should stop any burrowing animals from coming up through the beds. A tip on soil. Depending on the region you live in, soil may be a bit pricey. If you buy it by the bag, it could get very expensive if you have lots of deep beds to fill. This was our case. We had our soil delivered in bulk and had to buy a minimum amount. We then bought additional compost to top each bed off, that had other nutrients in it just for good measure. You don't have to do this, we just chose to. This was probably unnecessary and overkill since the soil we bought in bulk was really some pretty great soil. Now, if you only have a bed or two, and depending on how deep they are, buying your soil by the bag may be more cost-effective and easier to handle. Is there a way to not have to use so much soil? Well, yes. First, it is up to you how much soil you put in your beds. If you want deep beds, however, you need to have enough soil to make them deep beds. But there is a way to fill your beds, and not need as much soil if filling from the bottom up. Many people who have raised beds, in an effort to save on having to use so much soil, will use tree logs and other tree limbs to fill their beds halfway depending on the depth of their raised beds. Then they add soil, requiring less soil to fill. The tree limbs and logs will break down, which will enrich the soil over time. But it takes a long time for that process to happen. In our case, we decided to fill our beds completely up with soil, to within about 2 to 3 inches from the top of the raised beds. It's up to you how high you want your soil level to be. Our logic was, if we were going to have raised beds 24 inches high, we wanted them filled fully and without no filler logs whatsoever. When you first fill your beds, you will have some settling the first year, so you may want to add more later down the line as that happens. We wanted our soil beds to be deep, so we could pretty much grow anything we wanted. Now, of course, we are not going to grow a tree in it, and I know we have probably been overkill with the way we have built these beds, as well as the soil. We just wanted to build it as best we could, based on our budget and what we could physically handle. Each year or so we do add compost and other soil building nutrients to each bed to re-enrich the soil as needed. Since we have no large logs or tree branches to worry about under the soil, we don't have to worry about hitting a tree branch or log, should we go too deep turning over our soil, as we sometimes will do if we see it is getting too impacted. We also like to add decaying leaves and our own compost to our soils, along with adding plant nutrients and natural fertilizers. But if you decide to add logs and branches to save on soil, just remember, over time, the branches will decay and become compost if you choose to use this method. We just preferred not to do this with our raised beds and fill them all with a really good quality soil. The thought of physically having to locate the logs, load them up and carry them, would have been too much for us with our health issues, because let's face it, we are not 21 years old any longer. Now I know you have noticed some PVC hoops on some of our raised beds. Depending on the weather, we will cover these with clear plastic to protect our garden from frost in the fall if we are trying to extend our growing season, squeezing out every last bit of garden. We have also used them when hail was forecasted during our growing season. We also may use a mosquito cloth to prevent insects like the cabbage worm moths from laying their eggs on our cabbage. You don't have to do this, but is something we have used from time to time as needed. We really have not used them often, and I will probably just remove them this season. They were attached by using a bracket on the inside of the beds that are meant to hold PVC pipes. The brackets are available in a plastic or metal. We went with the metal so they would last longer. We want to encourage the bees to pollinate the rest of our garden, but where our cabbage is concerned, we use this as our non-toxic way to prevent insect damage from the cabbage moth laying their eggs. The PVC hoops with plastic is a great way to extend your growing season by basically creating a hothouse, using the heavy plastic. I think we used a 6 mm thick plastic. If you seal up the ends, it will help hold the heat in. Just be sure to open it on days where it is really not needed to allow for air circulation and natural rainfall. Remove it completely when all danger of frost is gone, or it may become too hot and kill your plants. You will see, the size we made our beds to be we felt was ideal, because at only 4 feet wide, it allows us to reach everything that we need to reach in the bed. It makes it easy to plant, weed and pick our bounty. I will share photos of some of what we produced in our garden. You'll see some of the lettuce and stuff that we planted. We had a bumper crop of pretty much everything. And we had so much food, we almost didn't know what to do with it. We ended up dehydrating a lot of it so that it would be stored for a long time and could use it in soups and stews. We even made veggie and fruit powders to be added in water for more nutrition, and for use in all sorts of recipes. We also helped to feed the neighbors, who were very much appreciative. In fact, soon you will find videos on dehydration and canning. So be sure to subscribe and stay informed on the latest videos we have out. Let us know in the comments below what topics you would like to see us cover on our channel. We value your ideas and want to thank you for being with us here today. We look forward to seeing you again here on the Buckeye Bloomstead channel.